mulheres, em canhões, em cavalos no zénite, no nadir, nos 4 pontos cardeais e no ardor único desta véspera de batalha. É claro que seria melhor se eu pudesse imaginar que todas estas coisas em que me detenho me invadissem também, mas neste sentido não há nada a fazer, porque se eu estou em toda a parte a esta hora, só há eu próprio a estar em mim. Lego ao futuro a história de Guillaume Apollinaire.
A morte de um homem, no preciso momento da vitória, pode parecer um símbolo, um monumento a todos os outros cujas vidas foram desperdiçadas por tão baixo custo. Quase 10 milhões em toda a Europa nesses 4 anos de 1914 a 1918. Apesar disso, Paris vivia. Continuava a haver Montparnasse, havia os sobreviventes. E agora acrescentava-se-lhes uma nova raça, os escritores e artistas do outro lado do Atlântico, para quem Montparnasse viria a ser um lar. Era uma nova vaga de americanos a quem o seu país parecia provinciano, puritano, antiquado, e que viam na França, ou pelo menos em Paris, a fonte aonde todos acorriam para se refrescar. Havia 10, 15 anos, tinham sido os imigrantes do leste, da Rússia, a trazer cor a Montparnasse. Agora, esta segunda vaga de imigrantes da Paris do pós-guerra, uma Paris exausta, vinha do oeste. O escritor francês Louis Aragon evoca o seu impacto.
They
were my American friends, the group known as the Exiles, the people who left Greenwich Village immediately after the war to come to France, taking advantage of the increase in the value of the dollar at that time. There was Matthew Josephson, for example, whose book, Life Among the Surrealists, I have just received. He talks about that period, and reading it has refreshed my memory. He was there with his wife, I.N.A, a very pretty woman. And there also were Malcolm and Peggy Cowley, with whom I spent some time near Vernon, not far from Claude Monet. Slater Brown, Hemingway, whose first book had just been published in Europe, who asked me to write something for the Blurb, which I refused, because at that time I considered advertising despicable. E.E. Cummings, who was the greatest poet in the United States, and also James Joyce.
E igualmente uma senhora notável chamada Sylvia Beach.
You met a lot of the Americans and the British, didn't you? Because they all came to your bookshop, Shakespeare and Company. The first person to come to mind is Hemingway, of course.
No, c'était plutôt Joyce.
No, actually, it is Joyce. But Hemingway was one of the first Americans.
Joyce était déjà chez moi.
Since Joyce was already coming to visit me, it was he who attracted all those people who had heard of Ulysses in America, which had been published in France, in Paris.
When did Joyce arrive?
Joyce came in 1920.
What was he doing in Paris?
Ezra Pound brought him over. He had been in Trieste, and Pound said he had to come to Paris with his family. For the avant-garde, Joyce was everything. He was the god. Shall I tell you how I met him at Spears?
Please do.
When I saw him, I was quite frightened, because Spears whispered to me, "That's the writer, James Joyce." So I was terrified, and I thought of running away. I was afraid of this very great man. But I went in all the same, and I saw him sitting at the table, not saying a word. After lunch, I went into another room, and there was Joyce. And I was brave enough to go over to him, and I said, "Are you the great James Joyce?" And he said, "James Joyce." Then we shook hands, and he spoke to me. He was most courteous and kind, very sensitive and not at all proud. It wasn't at all difficult to approach him. Then he asked me what I did, and I told him I had a bookshop called Shakespeare and Company. After that, he said, "I'll come and see you." And the next day, he came to my bookshop, which was in the Rue du Puitron in those days.
And it was shortly afterwards that you had the daring, almost audacious idea of publishing Joyce's Ulysses.
I don't see why it was daring. I felt it had to be done. And it was so interesting and so entertaining. But I couldn't foresee the difficulties. Joyce had terrible problems with his eyes, and he couldn't read his manuscripts, nor could he correct the proofs, so there were great difficulties. And on one occasion, he wasn't able to do it. It was the Circe episode, one of the most difficult parts, towards the end of the book. And he couldn't read his notes or his manuscript. And I had to find people to help us decipher them. I had a friend, Raymond Limossier, who helped us, and my sister, Cyprine, who was in the movies, would get up at 5 a.m. to work on the manuscripts. Raymond worked until she was unable to continue. Then she had an English friend who offered to carry on, but her husband was at the British Embassy, and when he read the manuscript, he flung it into the fire, unfortunately.
Why?
He was shocked, because it is one of the most shocking episodes of the book, perhaps. After that, we tried to get back the original manuscript, which Joyce had sold bit by bit to a collector in the States, who refused to send it back. But in the end, after lots of cables back and forth, he agreed to let us have a copy of the manuscript.
Joyce leads us fairly naturally to Hemingway, because I believe you say in your book that Hemingway smuggled Ulysses into the United States.
Yes, it was Hemingway. Ulysses was banned in America, which I hadn't expected. And when I tried to send copies to subscribers, they were all seized at the port of New York. There was no way of getting these copies in. So I told Hemingway about it, and I asked him, "What am I to do?" I often used to ask Hemingway what to do, and he would give me very good advice. So he said, "Give me 24 hours. I'll come and tell you." So, 24 hours later, he said, "I've got someone in Chicago. Write to such and such an address, and we'll get the books in via Canada." And that is what happened. He was a painter. He took a studio in Toronto, and I paid the rent. And every day, he took one copy of Ulysses over the border to America. And that was how the book got into the United States.
Which made Hemingway, the Nobel Prize winner, a smuggler of literature.
Hemingway used to go to Montparnasse. He worked very hard, but in the evenings he went to Montparnasse.
Ilya Ehrenburg told us the other day that he clearly recalls seeing Hemingway sitting outside the cafes for hours on end, watching the passers-by with the greatest amusement.
He didn't sit there for hours on end. He was so busy. He worked so hard.
Em princípios da década de 20, estes cafés de Montparnasse viam muitas vezes Ernest Hemingway, assim como muitos outros americanos. Tinham dólares e o dólar começava a dominar. O whisky e o bourbon juntaram-se às garrafas de Pernod e de cognac nas prateleiras dos bares.
Hemingway had given up journalism and settled here in Montparnasse to write. A few years earlier, at the age of 18, he'd volunteered as an ambulance driver on the Italian front, where he was twice decorated. He was also badly wounded, and in one of his early novels, he describes that moment. It's A Farewell to Arms. I tried to breathe, but my breath would not come, and I felt myself rush bodily out of myself, and out and out and out, and all the time bodily in the wind. I went out swiftly, all of myself, and I knew I was dead, and that it had all been a mistake to think you just died. Then I floated, and instead of going on, I felt myself slide back. I breathed, and I was back. I sat up straight, and as I did so, something inside my head moved like the weights on a doll's eyes, and it hit me inside in the back of my eyeballs. My legs felt warm and wet, and my shoes were wet and warm inside. I knew that I was hit and leaned over and put my hand on my knee. My knee wasn't there. My hand went in and my knee was down on my shin. I wiped my hand on my shirt, and another floating light came very slowly down, and I looked at my leg and was very afraid. Oh God, I said, get me out of here.
Portanto, o Hemingway que Sylvia Beach conheceu não tinha voltado há muito tempo da guerra.
He was a strapping, dark-haired lad with a moustache. He told me he had fought in Italy and been wounded, and that he had spent at least a year in hospital. And then that he had been wounded in the leg, and he offered to show me his scars. So I was very keen to see them, of course, even though it was a public bookshop with people coming and going. But he removed his shoe and sock and showed me his whole leg. His knee and his foot were covered with hideous scars. But at the same time, he was very modest. The way he showed me was almost childlike. Hemingway never boasted, and he seemed to be almost apologizing for having been to the war. And he said, "You know, I had to lie about my age. I told the army I was 19, when I was actually only 18 or thereabouts." But he didn't talk about his Italian campaign. He kept that for his book, A Farewell to Arms.
How long did he stay in Paris?
He stayed until the 30s.
What were the Americans seeking in Paris?
The Americans who came to Paris did so because they were banned in the States. They couldn't express anything. It was very puritanical after the First World War, and there was a period when people couldn't drink, couldn't write, paint, or do anything that they wanted to do. And they were very free here. They came to liberate themselves from a great many puritanical things. And those writers greatly admired Joyce, who was very free. So, naturally, they came to Paris en masse to find freedom, to be able to drink and write and express themselves.
Para descobrir a liberdade, para poderem beber e escrever e exprimir-se. Estas palavras de Sylvia Beach resumem o legado de Montparnasse, resumem a imagem e o magnetismo que Paris se granjeou.
It's something no longer new, something we take for granted, perhaps too much. But it's an ideal we owe to Montparnasse, that the test of a great city is that anyone can belong to it, from no matter where, just by living in it.